On September 30th, 1999, technicians at the Tokaimura nuclear plant in Japan accidentally caused a horrific chain reaction that changed the lives of everyone around them, including themselves. The man closest to the accident, Hisashi Ouchi, would suffer the worst consequences of all, becoming the most radioactive man in history, a title literally no one has ever wished for. Yet he was kept alive for months even while he wanted to die. How did this happen? Located 75 miles northeast of Tokyo, in Ibaraki Prefecture, Tokaimura was selected as an ideal location for a nuclear power plant thanks to the abundance of empty land, something that was and still is a premium in Japan. Soon, the complex would expand to include nuclear reactors, research institutes, disposal facilities, and fuel enrichment centers. Japan had constructed its first commercial nuclear power plant in 1961. The country had few natural power-generating resources and accelerated its nuclear energy program in an attempt to lessen its dependence on expensive imported energy. This meant that the nuclear industry was rapidly growing and provided good job opportunities. 1/3 of Tokyo's population ended up relying on the nuclear industry and Ibaraki for power. Hisashi Ouchi, born in 1965, started working in the plant as a technician sometime in the late 1980s. The purpose of the plant was to convert uranium hexafluoride into enriched uranium for use in nuclear energy. The process needed to be very precise. Each step conducted carefully and timed perfectly, each element mixed in exact proportions. Unfortunately, Ouchi was about to discover that Tokaimura's training and safety standards were, as one Greenpeace official stated, on par with those of a bakery. The first slip-up with the plant happened on March 11, 1997. Locals heard an explosion one day that reverberated throughout the entire town, and looked up in horror to see the power reactor on fire. Instead of sending people to examine what went wrong and ensure it never happened again, the Japanese government launched a cover-up to hide the extent of the negligence that had produced the explosion. A few dozen people in the area were affected by the radiation, but the story didn't make big headlines. In 1999, the officials directing plant operations had clearly failed to learn any lessons from their previous slip-up. They started experimenting with skipping some steps here and there when dealing with enriched uranium to see if they could produce nuclear fuel faster. Because when it comes to creating nuclear energy, are safety precautions really that important? By the time September rolled around, the plant was facing tight deadlines. The staff were supposed to dissolve and mix enriched uranium oxide with nitric acid to produce uranyl nitrate, commonly used as nuclear fuel. Workers had already missed a September 28th deadline that their bosses imposed for generating this fuel, even while cutting corners when it came to safety procedures. So on the morning of September 30th, Hisashi Ouchi, along with his co-worker Masato Shinohara and his 54-year-old supervisor Yutaka Yokokawa, decided to try one more shortcut. The problem is, despite the fact that they all had years of experience on the job, Ouchi had been working at the plant for more than 10 years at this point. None of them had been trained well enough to know what they were doing, or what the horrific effects of doing the wrong thing could be. Around 10 a.m., Ouchi and his co-workers started to mix the enriched uranium with nitric acid. Instead, however, of using automatic pumps that would mix exactly 5.3 pounds of uranium in a container designated for that purpose, they used their hands. To pour not 5.3, but 35 pounds of uranium into steel buckets. Suddenly, at 10:35 a.m., a blue flash exploded across the room. The uranium had reached critical mass and initiated a chain reaction causing nuclear fissions. Lethal amounts of radiation were now leaking everywhere, setting off the gamma radiation alarms. Hearing the alarms go off, the workers realized they'd made a critical, likely fatal mistake, but it was all too late. Ouchi experienced immediate intense pain and vomiting. After not being able to breathe well, he collapsed unconscious. Ouchi and his colleagues were immediately transported to the hospital. Doctors found that Yokokawa had been exposed to 3 sieverts of radiation, as he was the furthest away at his desk. Shinohara had been hit by 10 sieverts, and Ouchi, who was standing directly over the steel bucket when the reaction happened, had absorbed 17 sieverts of radiation. This officially meant he had been exposed to the highest amount of radiation a human had ever observably received. To understand exactly how bad this was, the safe level of radiation for humans to absorb within a year caps out at 100 millisieverts. After that, cancer risk starts to increase. An average X-ray exposes a person to 0.01 millisieverts. 5 sieverts of radiation would kill half the people exposed to it within a period of a month. Anything over 10 sieverts is automatically considered fatal. Shinohara, who had absorbed 10 sieverts, lasted for 7 months in the hospital before dying of lung and liver failure. Yokokawa, after a long hospital stay, thankfully managed to survive, though he ended up facing criminal charges of negligence. Ouchi had no such luck, and would not only die but experience one of the most brutally painful and slow deaths in history. He had severe radiation burns on his whole body, and his eyes were leaking blood. His white blood cells were almost fully wiped out, and he had experienced severe, horrific damage to all of his major organs. Without medical intervention, he would immediately have died. The medical staff placed Ouchi in a special ward to prevent him from coming into contact with hospital-borne pathogens, as his immune system was non-existent. However, they soon realized the extent of the damage to Ouchi's body and organs was way beyond anything they could deal with, and 3 days later he was transferred to the University of Tokyo Hospital. In his first week in the hospital, doctors tried experimental cancer treatments to replenish his white blood cells. They also performed almost constant skin grafts and blood transfusions to lessen the severity of his burns and keep Ouchi alive. The process was unbelievably torturous for Ouchi. After just a week at the hospital, he begged the doctors to let him go. "I can't take it anymore. I am not a guinea pig." Unfortunately, the doctors, partly thanks to Ouchi's own family wishes, didn't listen. Ouchi's family, including his wife, younger sister, and young son, held on to the slimmest of hopes that their loved one could survive. They refused to sign a DNR, do not resuscitate paperwork, and wouldn't agree to any humane euthanasia. So medical staff forged ahead with the innovative stem cell transplants using the patient's own sister's stem cells, something that had never before been used or suggested for radiation victims up to this point. The goal was to help Ouchi generate new blood on his own. At first, doctors were elated when the transplant appeared to temporarily work and help Ouchi. However, he soon spiraled right back down. There was so much radiation surging through his body that it killed off all the new cells it came into contact with. The radiation thwarted the doctors' every attempt to keep Ouchi alive. It had damaged his chromosomes beyond repair. As a result, Ouchi's DNA could not rebuild itself, which also meant each new skin graft went to waste, as the body could not repair itself enough to hold on to it. Soon, Ouchi's skin would start to melt and detach from its body. The extent of his suffering at that point was extreme. After 59 days in the hospital, Ouchi suffered a heart attack. However, his family had given instructions to resuscitate him should the worst happen, so doctors did. And this was just the first of many times they would have to bring Ouchi back to life. At one point, Ouchi had 3 heart attacks in 1 hour. Each time he temporarily died, he was suffering even more and more brain damage. For the last few weeks of his hospital stay, he was barely responsive. Finally, after 83 days, one final heart attack sent Ouchi over the edge that he'd been dangling on for weeks. On December 21, 1999, after multiple organ system failure, Ouchi's heart gave out and he died. In the weeks following the Tokaimura accident, and then Ouchi's death, a lot of scrutiny fell on both the company running the nuclear plant and the ethical implications of keeping Ouchi alive in pain for so long. Regarding the plant, the Japanese government would identify a total of 63 people in the area who were exposed to dangerous radiation from the accident. This included 14 workers at the plant who tried to stop the nuclear reaction in its tracks. The accident wasn't fully contained until 17 to 20 hours later, when workers managed to empty all the water from the tanks and poured in boric acid to halt the reaction in its tracks. At first, local officials minimized the extent of the damage, with the local governor Masaru Hashimoto saying initially we did not see the accident as being so serious. However, when other groups came in to investigate, they concluded that a much larger number of people were exposed to radiation than the government officially estimated. All families close to the plant were evacuated, and an additional 300,000 people in the surrounding area were told to stay inside for 24 hours. Greenpeace energy specialist Jan Rispens, who was on the scene shortly after the accident, had a lot to say about the matter. According to her, Tokaimura plant had the safety standards of a bakery, not a nuclear facility, and it was just a normal building. Investigations into the plant's operations unearthed unbelievable lapses in safety standards. The officials who operated the plant admitted workers had been using illegal corner-cutting procedures for 7 or 8 years. The fact that nothing too terrible had happened until that point was a miracle. Investigators also discovered that many plant employees did not even understand and had not been taught the concept of criticality, aka what happens to produce nuclear fission and how one might accidentally cause it. So, that's right, the company that operated the plant, JCO, didn't think it was necessary to educate its workers on how they might accidentally cause a nuclear explosion while they were handling nuclear material. To cap it all off, company officials admitted they didn't really have any protocol for this kind of accident because they never expected it to happen. Yep, with all the disregard in the world for safety procedures and the lack of any kind of training for technicians working with nuclear material, the bosses of JCO Company just woke up every day thinking things at the plant would keep humming along, until they accidentally created the most radioactive man in the world. As for Ouchi, people had many differing opinions on doctors' continuous attempts to keep him alive through so much pain and suffering. Some believe that the medical team at the University of Tokyo Hospital was partly curious to have first-hand observable test cases of a human being who had been exposed to such massive amounts of radiation, and this was one of the reasons Ouchi was kept alive for so long. In fact, the medical team that attended to him has, after the fact, come under severe scrutiny by many people for their actions. However, the doctors who tended to Mr. Ouchi made it clear that the process was very painful for them, and the attempts they made to keep their patient alive was at the direct, repeated request of his family. This was in addition to the fact that the doctors were quite simply stunned and not even sure what to do half the time because of the uniqueness of the situation. Chief physician Kazuhiko Maekawa told Kyoto News, "It was the first time I experienced such a case in my 30-plus years as a doctor. Almost every day we came across situations that were not covered in the medical textbooks, and there were tough moments and continuing treatment without any sign of a way out." Regarding Ouchi's family, Maekawa made it clear that their desire to keep him alive never wavered. Even when the patient fell into critical condition, the family never gave up hope, and I think that showed how much the family wanted Mr. Ouchi to keep living. So, was the treatment of Hisashi Ouchi, the most radioactive man who ever lived, for 83 days against his will, a case of questionable medical practices, or a family who wouldn't give up hope, or perhaps both? Let us know what you think in the comments below. In the meantime, check out one of our many other videos, with our promise that they won't make you radioactive at all.